Imagine this, friends. Let's make a bold assumption. Picture this. It is a cold Monday morning. The fog outside clings to the glass like the breath of the dead. You haven't even fully opened your eyes yet. And you discover that you are not lying in your warm bed. Instead, you are tied up inside a narrow, cramped, musty wardrobe. And standing before you is a man wearing a helmet made of raw meat. That helmet is still dripping blood. He is brandishing a whip in his hand. There is no hatred in his eyes, only a businesslike indifference. If you think this isn't absurd enough, imagine this when you finally escape and are walking on your way to work. You constantly feel there is the laughter of children behind you. That innocent yet spine-chilling laughter. They weep between the street trees, mocking your every step. But when you whip your head around, there is nothing. Only an empty street and an indescribable sense of oppression. If this scene appeared in your dream, you would call it a nightmare. If it appeared in reality, you would think this is a scene of schizophrenia. After all, in our physical world, none of this is possible. But for Franz Kafka, this is daily life. These are the laws of physics in the world he penned. Hello everyone. I am Raymond Shadow. The topic we are discussing today might be slightly depressing. It might even cause you a sensation of deep-sea suffocation. But trust me, this is a lifeline. We all know Kafka, that melancholic man who wrote about a giant beetle. We often use Kafkaesque to describe that inexplicable bureaucracy, or those illogical misfortunes in life. But today I want to tell you, I, too, once thought Kafka was just a doommonger who loved to whine. A weakling who only complained about how terrible the world was but offered no antidote. Until I read all his words. Until I combined the perspectives of the 20th century's brightest minds. Theodor Adorno and Hannah Arendt. Only then did I discover how outrageously wrong I was. Kafka didn't write novels. They are autopsy reports of the modern human soul. In this video, we will dive into this world full of failure, absurdity, and endless mazes. I will dismantle this hermetic universe for you. I will show you the invisible machines that turn you into a spare part. And finally, I will tell you why in Kafka's world, failure is not only inevitable, but is also a kind of soul-stirring beauty. This is not just about a deceased Czech writer. This is about you. About you, who in the dead of night feels, I am free, and that is why I am lost. Sit back. Pour a cup of coffee. Let us begin this journey of beautiful failure. Friends, let's first resolve the most fundamental question. That is, how exactly should we read Kafka? If you ask the existentialist master Albert Camus, he will tell you that reading Kafka is to make you feel that sensation from your scalp to your heels when you confront the absurdity of existence head-on. This sounds cool. It has the right vibe. But it's not deep enough. If we want to dig to the deepest depths of human nature, we must listen to what the leading figure of the Frankfurt School, Theodor Adorno, has to say. Adorno threw out an extremely subversive view. He said, regarding Kafka's works, you must take everything he wrote and read it literally. I know how crazy this sounds. You want me to take the man in the raw meat helmet literally? You want me to take the salesman turning into a beetle as a biological fact? You want me to believe that a person can truly be dragged away and executed by two men in black and die without ever knowing what crime he committed? Yes, this is exactly what Adorno means. He believes that if you simply reduce Kafka to a literary figure, attempting to depict the universal human condition, if you think all of this is just a metaphor to express life is hard, then you have crucially missed the true power of Kafka's work. Because with Kafka, there is no single, neat allegory that can explain everything. To help you understand this difference, we need to bring in another famous writer for comparison. George Orwell. Many people have read Animal Farm, right? That is a story about pigs, chickens, cows, and sheep rebelling. On the surface, it is a rustic feast suitable for the whole family to enjoy. But as long as you have a little historical knowledge, you know this is a super allegory about totalitarianism. In this game, every character has a perfect real-world counterpart. Those two pigs, Napoleon and Snowball. Even if you don't use much brain power, you can see. They represent Stalin and Trotsky. That horse, willing to bear the burden of blame and hard work, eventually sent to the slaughterhouse. It represents the silent and exploited proletariat. Those sheep that only follow and chant slogans, lacking any independent thinking ability, represent the blindly following masses. Some even joke that the fence might represent the prostate problem Stalin had at the time. This reading experience is very satisfying. It's like you are playing a puzzle game. Your brain is constantly connecting the dots. The pigs in the book correspond to dictators in reality. The horse in the book corresponds to workers in reality. When you have connected all the lines, when you have cracked all the symbols, you will have a sense of intellectual superiority. You will feel, aha, I get it. I saw through the author's intent. And then? Then a very serious problem arises. When you feel you have decoded this book, then this book, for you, is dead. You can close it, put it back on the bookshelf, and let it start collecting dust. Because your subconscious will tell you, I solved this problem. I cracked this case. I know what all the characters represent. This book is basically solved. I can leave it behind me. This is a sense of finality. A false sense of security we gain through rational analysis. But friends, this is where Adorno warns us. We absolutely must not read Kafka as another Animal Farm. Why? Because Kafka never, not even for a second, intended to express specific meanings in this way in his works. In his writing, there is no specific time, place, or a specific set of social conditions that he wanted to allude to. He wasn't writing about the Soviet Union, even if his prophecies were shockingly accurate. He wasn't writing about the Nazis, even if his sisters later truly died in concentration camps. If you try to decode Kafka, if you try to say, oh, this castle represents God or this trial represents conscience, you reduce Kafka's infinite, multidimensional fear into a boring crossword puzzle. This is not only Camus projecting too much of his own interest onto Kafka, but it ignores the true genius of Kafka's work. That genius lies in its universality. It lies in its ability to resonate with countless distinctly different situations. If you don't lock it into a specific metaphor, it can act like a magic mirror, reflecting the ugliness of every era. So, how does Adorno suggest we read it? If not an allegory, then what? Adorno used a very grim, even somewhat occult term. He said we need to view Kafka's work as hermetic. Imagine an iron box welded shut, or a deep-sea diving bell. When Kafka writes a book, he creates a self-enclosed, more literal, completely independently existing universe. In this universe, absurdity is not a symbol, absurdity is the physical law itself. In this hermetic universe, a man turning into a beetle needs no explanation. It is as natural as water flowing downwards. A person being executed for a trumped-up charge needs no reason, it is as normal as the sun rising. Adorno tells us, when we overcome that temptation, the temptation to always want to forcefully connect things in the book with the real world outside the book, when we stop trying to find the subtle deeper meaning behind it, and instead let ourselves be thoroughly immersed in this hermetic, suffocating universe, some more profound, more trembling truth will surface. Kafka is actually using this hermetic narrative, in this independent universe, to draw a picture of the general structure of domination. This is a social spell, a pathological slice of how any type, any scale of power structure justifies itself. This brings us to the most core, most hardcore theoretical part of today. If you can understand this segment, the world in your eyes will never be the same again. This is about the betrayal of reason. If you follow intellectual history, you know. Starting from the mid-20th century, top thinkers were all questioning the same problem. That is the limitation of reason. The Enlightenment told us that reason is light, reason is hope. Reason can lead humanity out of ignorance to build a perfectly ordered world. We built science, we built laws, we built bureaucratic management systems. We thought that as long as we relied on these rational systems to coordinate life, we could achieve happiness. But Kafka and Adorno saw the flip side of this coin. They asked, at what point do these systems constrict the world rationally, to the extent that they cause fundamental damage to being human? This is not just a philosophical question, this is a survival question. Some say that when we overemphasize reason, it demystifies the meaning of being a person, to the point that your existence is flattened. You are no longer a creature with a soul, emotions, and weaknesses. You become a datum, an employee ID, a KPI. Others say that the natural destination of this way of thinking is to view the people and things around you merely as tools for you to achieve a rational goal. Under this logic, the atrocities of colonialism, or the environmental pollution we see today, they are not loopholes or bugs of this perfect system. No, friends. They are the natural destination of this system. Because in this system, humans are not the end, humans are just rational cogs composing the machine. And cogs are replaceable. Cogs can wear out. Cogs feel no pain. So the question arises, for an individual living inside the belly of this machine, for a person squeezed by gears every day yet having to fake a smile, what kind of experience is this life, exactly? Adorno coined an extremely precise, extremely cruel term to describe this experience. He called it the soothing facade of repressive reason. It sounds like a mouthful, right? Let me translate it for you using Joseph K. from Kafka's The Trial. Joseph K., an ordinary bank clerk. One ordinary morning, he is suddenly arrested. But he isn't thrown into prison. He can continue to go to work, continue to live. It's just that there is an invisible sword hanging over his head. When he is tossed around like a ragdoll in the court system, when those rational legal procedures turn his life into a situation where he constantly feels disoriented, alienated, and guilty because he doesn't even know what he is accused of. This is not just a metaphor. Adorno says, this is literal reality. This is the mental state that modern people living in rational constriction systems experience every day. Let's look at how this tyranny of reason swallows us step by step. This is a general arc, like some destined tragic script. First, there is always a well-intentioned beginning. Whether it is building a company, or building a nation, or a set of life rules you set for yourself. Initially, it's because something bad happened, someone got hurt, an injustice occurred. Because the chaos of the real world makes people uneasy. So, those smart, well-intentioned, elitist people appear. They want to use reason to ensure this situation doesn't happen again. They formulate rules, they design procedures, they establish institutions. All of this sounds incredibly wonderful. This is an effort to make chaos more manageable. This feeling of being able to simplify reality is addictive. But, friends, the road to hell is often paved with good intentions. Inevitably, bad things will continue to happen. Because in this world, there is no perfect set of protocols that can predict everything that will happen. When rules fail, what is the first reaction of those in power? They won't think it's a problem with the rules themselves. They will think there aren't enough rules, they aren't detailed enough. So, the people responsible for these rules and procedures inevitably start adding more rules and procedures. Give it enough time. This rational system will proliferate like cancer cells, producing layers upon layers of rules. Until one day, you find yourself trapped. This leads to three very terrible things. First, you will start to feel a nameless guilt. Once there are so many rules you can't even remember them. You will feel guilty all the time, even if you haven't done anything wrong. because you aren't sure if you have inadvertently violated one of those thousands of rules. You will become cautious, become neurotic, just like Joseph K. Second, you will feel complete alienation. You will feel completely disconnected from the well-intentioned purpose of doing this in the first place. You are no longer working for justice, you are working to fill out forms. You are no longer dieting for health, you are living for the number on the scale. Third, you will feel disoriented. This rational system has stripped away some essence of you as a complete human being. You no longer trust your intuition, you only trust the manual. You no longer trust eye contact between people, you only trust status updates in the system. This system is like a giant black hole. It attracts the kind of person who wants to make rules and procedures. Those who benefit from gatekeeping. They deliberately keep procedures opaque, deliberately complicate everything to avoid scrutiny. What's even scarier is that we ourselves become accomplices. Why? Because following a rulebook is psychologically much easier than making new judgments about the world every day. To be as efficient as possible in this rational world, we willingly simplify ourselves into numbers on a page. We willingly let algorithms guide our behavior. This is what Adorno calls the general arc. And in Kafka's Hermetic universe, this arc is specifically magnified. Magnified to a terrifying, nightmarish level. Whenever power structures become self-justifying, the rational systems that compose them are no longer subject to any accountability. They are like a train that has lost its brakes but is still accelerating madly, carrying all of us, rushing towards that ending called Joseph K. I know, you might think this only happened in the political sphere. Like those judicial systems that initially wanted to make the world better but ended up becoming a show. But that underestimates Kafka too much. Adorno reminds us that this happens in every corner. It happens in a politician's career. He might start with the best intentions, but as years pass, for the convenience of decision-making, layers of compromise turn him into someone even he doesn't recognize. It happens in your workplace, it happens in schools. It even happens in the most intimate romantic relationships. When you start setting rules for affection, when you start replacing feeling with should, you are turning love into a bureaucracy. Even, we do the same cruel thing to ourselves. Like dieting. It starts just for health. But with the intervention of all the tools, trackers, calorie-counting apps, you start to simplify your experience. Eventually, all you care about is the number on the scale, not the true feeling of your body. In a sense, in the modern world, we are all people trapped in little Kafka novels of our own creation. We are all that man wearing the raw meat helmet, and also the one being whipped. Think about social media. It started with good intentions, a space connecting you and me. But when behavior is reduced to metrics, becomes traffic, becomes click-through rates, when everything is about keeping people on the app as long as possible, it drifts into a monster. We are incentivized to post anger, to manufacture fear, simply because we found the pleasure of compliance within that rational algorithmic protocol. This is the opaque, self-justifying power system, producing the same result over and over again. Adorno believes that the greatness of Kafka lies in his creation of this hermetic universe. This is not just a story, this is a device. A fluoroscope that lets you see reality clearly. You can read it now and see the tyranny of social media. You can read it 10 years later and see the ethical dilemmas of artificial intelligence. Kafka showed us those passively compliant characters. Those KS walking toward destruction like sleepwalkers. This is not mocking them. This is a mute battle cry. By showing the absurdity of compliance, Kafka is inviting us to dismantle that soothing facade of repressive reason. He lets us see that beneath that smooth, rational, efficient skin is bloody raw meat, is an endless maze. It is that castle called modernity that we can never escape, no matter how we struggle. Speaking of castles, we have to mention Kafka's unfinished posthumous work, The Castle. If the trial is a maze about law, then the castle is a purgatory about belonging. But before we push open that door which can never be entered, we need to first understand why in this hermetic universe, even a communication tool like the telephone, what comes out isn't human speech, but a deathly, bureaucratic white noise. Next, we will follow another great guide, Hannah Arendt, into that tyranny of rule by nobody, to see when power no longer needs a tyrant, how it turns every one of us into a superfluous ghost. In Kafka's unfinished posthumous work The Castle, our protagonist K is like a ghost breaking into another dimension. He arrives at a village blockaded by a blizzard. In the distance stands that mysterious castle. K claims to be a land surveyor hired by the castle, but the eyes of the villagers looking at him are like looking at a rat carrying a virus. To prove himself, K demands to call the castle. This should have been a simple action to clear up a misunderstanding. But the moment the call connects, what comes out of the receiver is not human conversation at all. It is a deathly silence mixed with the rustling of papers being turned, and a buzzing sound formed by the convergence of countless people whispering. That sound is like a massive office building devouring souls, spending its chaotic and long day. This is not just literary description. This is the most precise auditory metaphor for modern civilization. Welcome to Kafka's world through the eyes of Hannah Arendt. If Adorno saw the self-destruction of reason, then what Hannah Arendt saw is the political ruins after this destruction. We must know, Kafka wrote before World War I, and Arendt wrote after World War II. Between them lies Auschwitz, the Gulag, and the darkest 35 years in human history. Arendt tells us, there is no need to view Kafka as some sort of prophet, because the things he wrote in Arendt's time were no longer just nightmares, but had become the basic structure of modern human life. Kafka drew the blueprints, and the totalitarians of the 20th century built hell on earth according to these blueprints. Let us dismantle the first pillar of this hell, bureaucracy. Often, we think bureaucracy is just some necessary evil. Queuing at the DMV is annoying, filling out tax forms is tiring. But we tell ourselves, this is the price for maintaining the operation of modern society. Arendt would tell you with a cold sneer. This self-justification is exactly the biggest scam of bureaucracy. In Kafka's world, bureaucracy is not for service. It is a brand new form of rule. Arendt gave it a chilling name: rule by nobody, or tyranny without a tyrant. Think about Joseph K. in the trial. When he is arrested by those two nameless men in black, he asks a question any normal person would ask: what crime did I commit? Who is accusing me? What was the reaction of those two men? Not only did they not answer, but they made him feel that asking such a question was in itself a sin. They said, it doesn't concern us, we are merely executioners. You ask the judge says he is waiting for documents from above. You ask the lawyer says relations need to be greased. In this massive machine, you will discover a horrifying fact: no one is at the helm. Even if you walk to the deepest part of this maze, you cannot find a person responsible for your fate. Arendt wrote in The Origins of Totalitarianism, in a government by bureaucracy, decrees appear in their naked purity, as though they were no longer issued by powerful men, but were the incarnation of power itself. This depersonalization is the perfect camouflage for tyranny, because if there is no specific perpetrator, you cannot resist, you don't even know who to hate. If someone holds a knife to your neck, you can fight back. But if a stamped document sends you into the meat grinder and tells you this is just procedure, it's not personal against you, your anger is completely dissolved, like punching cotton. This leads to the core of the Kafkaesque experience, a deep, structural disorientation. In the trial, this disorientation is carefully designed as a torture device. Joseph K. is told that the trial will take place at some future time. But that time is forever fluid, forever postponed. This uncertainty is the most effective means for a totalitarian system to control humans. If you let a person live every day in the fear of not knowing what will happen tomorrow, flooding him with countless unpredictable decrees. He can never organize, never form the will to resist. He can only be like a headless fly, draining his last bit of vitality in paranoia and anxiety. This is not just control, this is spiritual death by 1,000 cuts. And the second pillar supporting this rule by nobody is what Arendt calls a necessity and technical administration. Have you noticed? Those who hold absolute power rarely say, "I want to do this." They always say this is necessary. In the trial, just before Joseph K. is executed, the prison priest says something to him that chills the spine. He says, "Don't worry too much about whether it's true, the real thing to focus on is that it is necessary." This is the ultimate lie of totalitarianism. Stalin wouldn't say, "I want to kill people," he would say this is historical necessity. A Nazi wouldn't say, "I want to commit genocide," he would say this is the natural law of the race. They disguise politics as nature, disguise atrocities as science. In modern society, this disguise has become even more covert. It has become technocracy, become technical management. Those high-ranking technocrats, they never admit they are engaging in politics. They are just calibrating society, just pursuing efficiency. When everything is explained as objective laws or technical necessity, we, as ordinary people, lose the qualification to refute. After all, how can you refute truth? How can you refute data? So, we obediently surrender our freedom in exchange for so-called necessity. Until one day, this necessity pushes us into the abyss. This brings us to the bleakest undertone of Kafka's world. A state even more terrifying than death, loneliness and statelessness. In the castle, K.'s tragedy is not that he can't enter the castle. It is that he can never find a legitimate identity in this village. He is a perpetual stranger, a superfluous existence. Arendt herself, as a Jewish refugee fleeing to America, she understood this feeling too well. In K, she saw the essence of the modern refugee. People usually think what refugees lack is food, shelter, sympathy. No, Arendt says, what refugees truly lack is the right to have rights. This is an extremely profound insight. As a modern person, your so-called human rights are actually bundled with your citizenship. Once you are stripped of the qualification to belong to a political community, once you become, like K, a stateless person without a file, without belonging, you lose the basic dignity of being human. You are no longer a person, you are an administrative nuisance waiting to be processed. In the castle, K spares no cost to pander to that absurd system, just to gain even a tiny bit of recognition, just to prove the legitimacy of his existence. This desperation to squeeze into the system even as the lowest screw, just to prove oneself useful. Isn't this a true portrayal of many of us modern people? When we work desperately just not to be discarded by the system. When we fear that once we stop, we will become that superfluous person. We are actually all living in K.'s shadow. Arendt tells us, this deep loneliness, this atomized isolation, is exactly the breeding ground for totalitarianism. When a person feels completely abandoned, feels that asking anyone for help will only result in being pushed to the bureaucracy, he becomes extremely fragile. He will crave any ideology that can bring him a sense of belonging, even if that ideology is evil. This is why Kafka is not just literature. He is the coldest prophet of modern politics. He shows us what the world looks like when law becomes a maze, when power becomes a driverless machine, when humans become superfluous numbers. But beneath all this grand political and philosophical analysis, there is a more concrete, more heart-wrenching layer. That is our body. When the spirit is crushed by the system, the body often betrays first, or rather, awakens first. Now we will shift our gaze from the towering castle and the dark courtroom, focusing on a specific room, a specific bed, to look at that man named Gregor. How he woke up one morning and found he had completely lost the qualification of being human. And this loss turned out to be the only true resistance of his life. Let us push open the bedroom door of that salesman, Gregor Samsa, to look at that most famous morning in literary history. The metamorphosis. Many people reading this story focus on the bizarre setting of turning into a beetle. They ask, why did he change? How did he change? Was it magic? But Kafka doesn't care about these things at all. Remember Adorno told us to read literally? It means, in that family, in those social relations. Gregor Samsa, right here and now, is a giant, disgusting vermin. This is not just a biological mutation. This is a sociological manifestation. Think about who Gregor was before the transformation. He was a traveling salesman, the sole breadwinner of the family. He left early and returned late every day, enduring terrible food, fluctuating traffic, and shallow interpersonal relationships. The only meaning of his life was to act as a money-making machine, to support his parents and his violin-playing sister. As long as this machine was still running, as long as he could bring wages home, he was a good son, a good brother. He was a so-called human. But that morning, the machine broke. When he lay in bed, turned into a beetle, unable to catch that 5 a.m. train. Something terrible happened. The real horror was not that he grew antennae and a hard shell. The real horror was the reaction of his family and his boss. The boss immediately sent someone to check on him, like checking a damaged spare part. And his family, those relatives who once relied on him and praised him, in that instant, displayed a chilling, pragmatic indifference. This reveals one of the bloodiest unspoken rules of modern society. Your value is merely equal to your utility. As long as you are a tool of productivity, you are a sacred human. Once you lose productive capacity, once you can no longer provide value, whether you are sick, tired, or depressed, you are instantly downgraded from human to vermin. Friends, isn't this our deepest fear? When we lie in a hospital bed worrying about being laid off for taking sick leave, when we feel like waste because of occupational burnout, we have actually all become Gregor Samsa. Our bodies, through striking, through sickness, through mutation, refuse to continue being that soulless cog. Gregor's transformation is actually a riot of the flesh. His subconscious is screaming, I quit. I would rather be a bug than continue to be your tool. But the price of this resistance is destructive. This brings out another extremely important image in Kafka's writing: the violence of the father. In the Metamorphosis, the father is not just a parent. He is the miniature version of that autocratic power, the dictator in the family. When Gregor tried to crawl out of the room, even if just to listen to his sister play the violin, what did his father do? He grabbed an apple from the table and threw it viciously at his own son. An apple embedded itself in Gregor's soft back and rotted there. This is a highly symbolic image. The authority you once supported is now using food, the apple, that should nourish life, to murder you. This wound, this betrayal and violence from his closest kin, eventually led to Gregor's starvation and death. This brings us to another masterpiece of Kafka regarding the body and suffering. A more metaphysical, yet more desolate story. A hunger artist. If Gregor's hunger was because no one gave him human food, then this artist's hunger was a carefully orchestrated performance. Imagine a person locked in a cage, displaying not eating as a talent to the public. Does this sound just like some kind of reality show we have now? Or some extreme challenge performed by influencers for views? But what Kafka wrote is far more profound than this. This hunger artist sits on straw, enduring the torment of hunger, to win the audience's gasps and applause. He thought the audience was admiring his willpower, admiring his dedication to art. But in fact, the audience was just consuming his suffering. The audience was just watching the spectacle, even suspecting him of eating secretly. As time passed, this performance was no longer popular. People lost interest in watching a man starve. Everyone went to see the vibrant panther in the neighboring cage. The hunger artist was forgotten in the corner, buried in the straw. Until the very last moment of his life, the circus supervisor found him. At this moment, the artist spoke that soul-shattering truth. He said, "I do not deserve your admiration." The supervisor asked, "Why?" Using his last breath, the artist said, "Because I couldn't find the food I liked. If I had found it, believe me, I should have made no fuss and stuffed myself like you or anyone else." Boom. This is the Kafkaesque twist. This is the spine-chilling truth. He became an artist, became a spectacle. Not because he possessed extraordinary will, but because he felt a thorough, physiological disgust toward the food provided by this world, toward the worldly pleasures provided by this world. He could not find anything in this world full of lies, mediocrity, and the stench of money that could nourish his soul. So he could only choose hunger. He could only choose refusal. This refusal was misread by the world as art, misread as performance. But for him, this was just a helpless state of survival. Isn't this a portrayal of every awakened person? In this world full of junk information, cheap entertainment, and fake relationships, we cannot find spiritual sustenance. So we appear out of place. We appear like freaks. We are locked in a cage of loneliness. Even if we scream, "I just can't find anything to eat," people outside will only think we are performing some profound performance art. Finally, the artist died. He was cleared out of the cage, replaced by a young, strong panther glowing with wildness. The audience cheered. Because the panther represented vitality, represented unthinking, vibrant blindness. And that thinker, that painful refuser, was swept into the dust of history like garbage. Friends, from the rotting apple on Gregor's back to the empty stomach of the hunger artist, Kafka is telling us, in this alienated world, the suffering of the body is the only truth. When our spirits are disciplined into submission by the system, only our bodies are still using their pain, their hunger, their mutation to speak the truth for us. It is saying, "I don't belong here. I don't accept the rules of this world." This honesty is fatal. But it is precisely in this fatal honesty that Kafka completed his greatest work, which is himself. Below, we will turn our gaze from fiction to reality, to look at Franz Kafka, this living, breathing man. How he used his fragile body suffering from tuberculosis to live failure as a kind of exquisitely beautiful art. To see how that real K, under the shadow of the guillotine, wrote those words destined to be burned. After touring Kafka's hermetic universe, we witnessed the executioner wearing a raw meat helmet, witnessed the deathly bureaucratic white noise in the telephone line, and witnessed the rotting apple on the back of Gregor who turned into a beetle. Now, I want to ask everyone to pull their gaze back. Cast it upon that thin, pale figure suffering from tuberculosis hiding behind all these nightmares. Franz Kafka. If his novels are medical records, then his life is that long and painful terminal illness. We often think that geniuses are geniuses because they possess some extraordinary ability. But for Kafka, it is quite the opposite. His genius stems from his inability. It stems from his total defeat in secular life. Let us first return to Prague at the end of the 19th century. For Kafka, this city itself was a prison. He was born into a German-speaking Jewish family. In Prague at that time, Czechs hated German speakers. Germans hated Jews. From the moment of his birth, Kafka was a double outsider. The language he spoke, German, was seen as a tool. But he used this instrumental language to build a castle that no one could enter. And sitting inside this castle was a true tyrant. Not anyone else, but his father, Hermann Kafka. We must talk about this father. Because without understanding this father-son relationship, you will never understand the fear of authority in the trial. Kafka's father was a self-made businessman, strong, crude, full of worldly vitality. And in his father's eyes, what was Kafka? A weak, sensitive waste with no masculinity. A parasite who only hid in his room writing inexplicable things. This is not just a generation gap. This is a war between two species. In 1919, Kafka wrote a letter to his father that was dozens of pages long. In the letter, he wrote a sentence that makes literary history tremble. "My writing was all about you." Friends, listen to this sentence. In all his works, he is fighting an illogical, oppressive authority figure. The judge who sentenced him to death is his father. The parent who kicked him out of the house is his father. The giant who stepped on him like a bug is still his father. Writing, for Kafka, was not a display of talent. It was a form of revenge, a form of escape. It was the only way he could keep breathing in front of an absolute authority. But this escape came with a huge price. That was his castration in real life. Kafka longed for marriage all his life, yet fled from marriage all his life. He was engaged twice to the same woman, and cancelled twice with various excuses. Why? Because he was afraid. He feared that once he married, once he became a husband, a father, a man in the secular sense, he would lose that absolute solitude. And that solitude was the fuel for his writing. In a letter to his lover, he wrote a passage of extremely dark text. He said, "We are bound together, not like walking into a wedding altar, but like those prisoners bound together and sent to the guillotine during the French Revolution." Imagine this. In a passionate love letter, he thought not of the altar, but of the guillotine. This is Kafkaesque romance. A sense of fate doomed to destruction, smelling of blood. This pessimism eventually became reality. He never married. In all his novels, almost none of the protagonists have offspring. There is only one exception, but that protagonist also chose to abandon the child and flee. In reality, he completely severed his biological continuity. Just like Gregor in the Metamorphosis. He refused to be a provider, refused to be a qualified social component. Because in that utilitarian society, if you can't earn money to support the family, you are a vermin. This sense of thorough uselessness reached its peak in an extremely short but vividly visual story by Kafka. This story is called The Bucket Rider. The story tells of a poor man. In the cold winter, his coal bucket is empty. He has no money to buy coal. But he must try his luck. Because he is too poor, so poor that his body has lost its weight. He actually rides on that empty coal bucket and flies. He flies to the bottom of the coal dealer's building, begging for a little bit of coal like a ghost. Did the coal dealer's wife see him? Maybe she did, but she pretended not to. Because poverty means you are invisible, means you are voiceless. That man riding on the bucket, no matter how he shouted, the person with resources couldn't hear him. Finally, he rode the bucket, flew towards the ice mountains, and disappeared into the void. This story is simply a metaphor for Kafka's own life. He worked as a lowly clerk in an insurance company for 15 years. Dealing with industrial accidents every day, looking at workers whose fingers were cut off by machines. He hated this job, felt it was the murder of his soul. He wrote in his diary, "My job might completely shatter me." He felt he was that man riding on the empty bucket. In front of this hard, cold world full of transactional logic. He was weightless, he was superfluous, he was inaudible. And this self-loathing eventually evolved into an impulse for destruction. In the final stage of his life, when tuberculosis, that bloodthirsty beast, finally choked his throat, making even swallowing food a torture for him, he made an astonishing decision. He handed all his manuscripts, the unfinished The Trial, The Castle, America, all to his best friend, Max Brod, and left a last testament. Burn them. Burn them. Burn all these nightmares, all these struggles, all this revenge against his father. Burn them all to ashes. Is this extreme perfectionism or extreme despair? Maybe both. Kafka felt he was a failure. He didn't finish any novel. He didn't like the ending of The Metamorphosis. He felt his words, just like his person, were a poor translation. A failed imitation of that unspeakable truth. But, friends, here lies a huge irony and also a huge miracle. Max Brod betrayed him. This friend did not burn the manuscripts but organized and published them. It is precisely because of this betrayal that we can sit here today talking about Kafka. That we can see the soul-stirring beauty in this loser. Kafka's failure is a beautiful failure. Why is it beautiful? Because in this world, winners are usually those who comply with the rules. Those who know how to please their fathers, please their bosses, please the system. They live very well, they are full of vitality like that strong panther. But they have no stories. Their souls have been assimilated by these rules, becoming mediocre and hard. But Kafka, he lost all secular battles. He lost marriage, lost health, lost the qualification of being a normal person. But precisely because he lost these, he was able to retain that most sensitive, most fragile, yet most authentic self. He used his own body as war to crash against that invisible castle. Although he crashed until his head broke and bled, although he died outside the city walls, the sound of his crash penetrated 100 years of time, resonating with us. He is speaking what we want to say. He let out that mute battle cry for every modern person who feels lonely, alienated, and squeezed by the system in the dead of night. He is a beautiful mourner. He sobbed at every failure, but turned this sobbing into the hardest diamond in literary history. So, friends, when you feel like a loser in life, when you feel I am not successful enough, not rich enough, not useful enough, think of Kafka. Think of that ghost riding an empty bucket flying towards the ice mountains. His failure is precisely the proof of him being human. His failure is precisely the proof that he was not completely digested by this world. In this sense, failure is not only acceptable. Failure is even a kind of glory. Here, we have traveled through Kafka's hermetic universe. Walked through the tyranny of rule by nobody. Witnessed the rebellion of the body. And touched the scarred soul of this writer. Now, we can finally lift our heads from the abyss, holding the final legacy Kafka left us. In the last part of the video, I will distill all this into 10 rules for survival. This is not just a lesson about literature. These are 10 survival guides dedicated to those lost in this absurd world. If you are feeling suffocated, then the following content will be the hammer for you to break the wall. Since the world is so absurd, since we are destined to fail, since no matter how we struggle, the gate of that castle will never open for us, then why should we continue? Why not just fly straight into the void like that bucket rider? That is a good question. But Kafka used his whole life to give another answer. Although he was a pessimist, he was absolutely not a surrenderer. From those unfinished manuscripts and those protagonists struggling in pain, I have distilled 10 rules for survival. You can call them the 10 commandments of the abyss. These 10 rules might not help you get a promotion or a raise, might not help you achieve secular success, but they can help you in this crazy world to stay awake, maintain dignity, and even gain a kind of tragic freedom. Commandment 1: embrace failure, because that is the only way to evolve. In all of Kafka's works, failure is the absolute protagonist. Joseph K. failed to win the lawsuit and died. K. failed to enter the castle and died. The hunger artist failed to find food and died. Except for Carl in America, it seems no one can walk out of his stories alive. If you look at it with secular eyes, this is all tragedy. But if you change your perspective, just as we learned in biology, evolution only happens when genes make mistakes. If genes always replicate perfectly, life would forever be a stagnant pool. It is precisely because of replication failure, precisely because of mutation, that life has diversity, has the possibility of adapting to the future. Kafka tells us that failure is the norm, even a necessity. He was a loser in reality. He didn't marry, didn't get promoted, didn't become famous. But it was precisely this failure that let him avoid the trap of mediocrity. That let him become the unique Kafka. So, friends, when you screw everything up, don't feel like the sky is falling. Maybe that is just some mutation in your genes trying to take you to a brand new place. Failure is beautiful. It is the proof that you are alive. Commandment 2. Evil is whatever distracts. This is a deafening sentence Kafka wrote in his diary. Evil is whatever distracts. In life, we are always full of excuses. We are waiting for a perfect moment to pursue our dreams. We are waiting to save enough money before traveling, waiting for the kids to grow up before writing. We are waiting for conditions to mature. But Kafka tells you, this is a trap. He worked that damn insurance company job all his life. Dealing with workers' compensation every day, drowning in trivialities every day. He complained that work was crushing him. But he didn't stop writing. He utilized every late night, every squeezed-out crack to write. He never had a perfect writing environment, his novels are mostly even unfinished. But he wrote. The lesson here is extremely cruel but also extremely simple. Don't wait for perfect conditions. There are never perfect conditions. Life is a series of interruptions. Life is a series of traps. If you want to do something, do it now. Even in a garbage heap, even in a cage. Even if, like Kafka, you can only write a story without an ending. Do not let those so-called serious matters, those trivialities for survival, distract your soul's attention. Commandment 3. Accept absurdity. The meaning of life is that it stops. If there is a thread that can string together all of Kafka's stories, it is absurdity. You are arrested but don't know the charge. You are hired but have no work. You turn into a bug but still worry about being late. None of this has logic. None of this has meaning. We always try to find a reason, an explanation for everything. We feel that everything happens for a reason. Don't be silly, friends. Kafka tells you coldly, many times, bad things just happen, without any reason. The universe doesn't owe you an explanation. Fate doesn't owe you logic. The meaning of life might simply lie in that it stops. In that final period. When we stop obsessing over finding that meaning that doesn't exist at all. When we stop, like Kay, desperately trying to hear God's will from the telephone noise. We instead gain freedom. Since everything is absurd, since there is no preset script, then you can tear up the script and act in your own way. Even if it is acting as a comical beetle flipped on its back. That is your own performance. Commandment 4. Radical loneliness is your destiny. Look at Gregor Samsa. He dedicated his life to his family, becoming the sole breadwinner. But when he turned into a bug, even if he just lost his labor ability, his family were the first ones who wanted him dead. This sounds cruel, but it reveals a truth. In this utilitarian web of social relations, we are essentially alone. Your value is based on exchange. Once the chain of exchange breaks, the so-called warmth will collapse instantly. So, the lesson here is: lower your expectations of others, even lower your expectations of intimate relationships. Understand that loneliness is the norm, belonging is temporary. The moment you realize ultimately we are all alone, you will no longer be kidnapped by the fear of being abandoned. You won't distort your own soul just to please others, to fit into a group. Like Kafka, even at the moment of engagement, he could see the guillotine. Although this clarity is painful, it can save you from greater harm. Commandment 5. Laugh at the abyss. Life is full of irony. Kafka's friend Max Brod recalled, when Kafka read the opening of the trial to his friends, reading the part where Joseph K. is arrested for no reason, all of them laughed uncontrollably, including Kafka himself. Does this sound twisted? What's so funny about a story regarding a death sentence? But this is the highest level of Kafkaesque wisdom. Facing that invincible, absurd, massive system. Facing that destined ending of failure. Crying is useless. Anger is useless. The only thing that can dissolve this oppression is humor. It is a black, absurd, ironic laughter. Life is full of this irony. The judicial system became a net to catch the innocent. Food became poison that kills. Technology that was supposed to free us became a cage monitoring us. Since this is the case, we might as well laugh at it. Like the contemptuous laugh of Sisyphus when pushing the rock up the hill. Laughter is the weak's final, and also most powerful, counterattack against the strong. Commandment 6, you cannot know everything, ignorance is sometimes bliss. Western civilization is built on an arrogance. That through reason, through science, we can be all-knowing and all-powerful. But all of Kafka's protagonists hit a wall in this pursuit. Joseph K. wants to know the law. K wants to know the castle. The more they want to figure it out, the deeper they fall into the maze. Kafka is telling us that knowledge is always relative, always incomplete. Even language itself is a poor translation. I cannot make you fully understand me. I cannot fully understand myself either. This unknowability sounds depressing. But this is actually a relief. It means we don't have to be responsible for everything. It means we don't have to carry the burden of that all-knowing God's perspective. In this era of information overload, where everyone feels they must express an opinion on the world, admitting I don't know, admitting I don't understand, is actually a huge wisdom. Commandment 7, desacralization, we are just another creature. In the Metamorphosis, Kafka did something extremely blasphemous. He turned a human into a bug. This directly challenges the myth that man is the spirit of all things, man is God's favorite. Evolution tells us that cockroaches are much more successful than us. They have lived for 250 million years, the dinosaurs died out, but they are still here. Only a narcissistic species like humans would think they are sacred and inviolable. Kafka tore up this myth. Gregor has a human mind but is trapped in an animal body. Isn't this a portrayal of every one of us? We have noble spiritual pursuits, yet have to be constrained by this body that gets sick, ages, and gets hungry. Accept that we are not sacred. Accept that we are just another creature. Accept ordinariness. Accept humbleness. This can let us walk out of that illusory sense of superiority. To feel, with feet on the ground, the real pain and joy of being a creature. Commandment 8, like that panther, but never give up struggle. This might sound a bit contradictory. Since failure is destined. Since we are just bugs, why struggle? But look at Kafka's protagonists. None of them lay flat. The hunger artist insisted on fasting until death. Joseph K. kept appealing until execution. K kept trying to contact the castle until his life ran out. This is Kafkaesque heroism. Not fighting because you can win, but because fighting itself is the proof of existence. Although authorities have infinite resources, although bureaucracy has countless walls, individuals possess a tenacious, even irrational persistence. This reminds me of the panther at the end of A Hunger Artist. It possessed vigorous vitality. It didn't think, it just lived. Although Kafka seemed to praise the panther's vitality, I tend to think he was paying tribute to that dead artist. Even if swept away like garbage, his persistence still constitutes a spiritual monument. Even if this monument is built in a pile of straw. Do not give up, friends. Even if just to prove the absurdity of this absurd world. Persist in being a non-compliant outsider. Commandment 9, alienation is universal, we are all commodities. Kafka was the first writer to write alienation into the marrow. In his time, alienation was a product of industrial society. In our time, alienation has become the air. We don't know where food comes from. We don't know who our neighbors are. We don't even know where the data we generate goes. We have become commodities. We have become traffic. We have become tags in the eyes of algorithms. This alienation is universal. Even the King of England, even billionaires feel lonely and isolated. Understand this, and you won't feel like a freak. This feeling of loneliness, this feeling of not belonging to this world, is not your sickness, but the sickness of this era. You are normal. It is the world that is mad. Commandment 10. Tell your story, even if it is a last testament. Finally, and the most important one, tell stories. Although Kafka felt everything was meaningless, although he wanted to burn his manuscripts, he still wrote and wrote for a lifetime. Every painful late night, he built his own sanctuary with words. Having a voice is the best thing you can possess. Even if that voice is faint, even if that voice is describing failure. It is a resistance against nothingness. Kafka failed to finish his novels, failed to get a perfect ending. But he left a voice. This voice traveled through a century and hit you who are watching this video right now. This in itself is a miracle. So, whatever you are going through, however much of a failure you feel you are, write it down. Speak it out. Turn it into a song, a painting, a video. This is your only, and eternal, revenge against this indifferent world. Friends, we have finally reached the end of the journey. From Adorno's hermetic universe to Arendt's rule by nobody. From Gregor's mutated flesh to Kafka's own beautiful failure. We saw a suffocating abyss. But it is precisely in this abyss that we saw an unprecedented freedom. Kafka once said a sentence full of paradox. I am free and that is why I am lost. Yes, we are lost. Because we no longer believe in that fake map. Because we refuse to walk that prescribed path leading to mediocre happiness. We are the lost ones. We are the exiles. We are that ghost riding an empty bucket flying towards the ice mountains in the cold winter night. But that's okay. Because only those who are lost can see scenery that others cannot see. Only in absolute darkness can you see the faint light emitted by your own soul. Do not fear that castle. Do not fear that trial. Even if in the end you are executed like a dog. As long as you maintain that mute battle cry at the last moment. You have won. I am Raymond Shadow. This is Shadow Mythos. If you also feel like an outsider in this absurd world, if you are also looking for that rope to pull you up from the abyss, or just want to find someone to laugh with you in the abyss, please subscribe to this channel. Tell me in the comments what your beetle looks like. See you next time.